Let's go between portals. You're listening to the sound of a completely new screen experience. A startling, new kind of excitement. As Between Portals plunges you into the most incredible adventure that man could ever achieve. To make a podcast that crosses a new frontier may seem impossible today. Outer space, the depths of the seas, the bowels of the earth, the past, the future, all have been subjects for the camera. But now a podcast called Fantastic Voyage has broken through the portals in an unexpected direction to create an adventure of astonishing suspense and beauty. One of the miracles of the universe, the science of cannabis. Between portals and beyond. Welcome to your future with Between Portals. Dr. Bob and Dr. Allen. Doc Bob and the Doc Allen Show. It's the Dr. Bob and Dr. Allen Show.
The drug war continues, and a citizen who was coming from Oregon, had Oregon Place, was driving through Wichita Falls, Texas, which is north of Dallas, and they profiled him and said he was speeding 4 miles over the limit, and stopped him and searched the car and found a vapor pen. And they said that the reason they searched the car was because they could smell marijuana. So yesterday was a evidentiary. It was a hearing, a motion to suppress the fact that the cops didn't have justification to go do the search. And so my testimony was basically that the smell of cannabis in a bud form, the smell of smoked cannabis, and the smell of oil all have 3 different odors to them. And that you couldn't smell oil when it was in a glass container. And so the judge said that they ruled against the motion to suppress, so they're going to continue with the trial. They may appeal this decision, but apparently the judge doesn't even have to say why they make a judgment like that. They just say, you're going to trial, and that's it. So it was interesting. I've testified as expert witness numerous times in different states, so they couldn't suppress my my knowledge about it. And the prosecutor asked me about Delta 8 and its effects, and so I talked about polarimeters and how you determine whether an isomer is rotated or not. So it was a useless thing to do, but at least I tried to help.
Good man.
So we'll see what happens. So they're going to go to trial. They may actually try to plea bargain out. And the guy's already in a compromised position because apparently he had $150,000 on him. And they were originally going to charge him with money laundering. And he made a deal with them. I can't believe this, that they took 100,000 of it and they give him 50,000 back, and they're all happy. And they just dropped the money laundering charge. And now they're into this, trying to prosecute him for a gram of oil in a pen. So it happens all over. There's other cases like this going on as well.
And that was in the state of where?
In Texas. It's Wichita Falls, Texas, not Kansas. So, Dr. Bob, what do you think about Delta 8, and how do they determine what is Delta 8 and Delta 9 and Delta 11?
Well, I'm not into all of the analytics. There's so many really sophisticated methods that can tell you those things accurately if they're performed by a properly trained person who knows what he's doing and the machinery is all good. So, you know, so I've not used any specific isolate of one or the other where I could say, yeah, you know, I've taken the Delta 8 and this is what I felt.
Right.
You know, I take a lot of THC and whole plant extracts on a daily basis. And so I tend to not notice any kind of subtle differences.
Right. So anyway, I explained how when you eat cannabis that your liver absorbs the THC and converts it from Delta 9 to Delta 11. And that actually potentiates the effect of the drug. It's hot. It works more as Delta 11 than it does Delta 9.
Well,
I don't know why that is.
Nicer, I think. I eat every day more so than I smoke.
Do you know why it's stronger? What chemically, why is Delta 11 stronger than Delta 9?
I think it's got a higher affinity for the receptor, so smaller quantities will activate it. It'll spend more time turning it on.
Oh, that makes sense. So
yeah, I think that's the answer. Higher affinity. Like you know, you have a receptor and then you have a molecule that binds in there. And the stronger that bond is, the more time it spends in there activating the receptor, and the more likely the receptor, in the case of the cannabinoid receptors, they actually get internalized and then activate intracellular communication. That gives you the effects depending on what kind of cell is involved. You know, you got CB receptors everywhere, CB1 receptors everywhere.
Right. They've demonstrated that CB1 receptors are on the nuclear membrane and on the mitochondrial membrane.
Yeah, they're and on all your cells because they're regulating.
Yeah, on the surface of the cells too.
They regulate energy production by their control of calcium channels in the mitochondria. Everything always has to kind of fit and be stabilized. And you know, there's electronic phenomena happening, and you know, chemical subtleties. So when everything is appropriate, then you get activity, and part of that often requires that you have the right ionic environment. And different salts have different preferences for activating different kinds of reactions. And calcium in general is an activator. Calcium is very interesting. You know, I think it's the #1 metal on the planet in abundance. And it's what's called divalent. It has a double plus charge. So it can accept a relationship with 2 negative charges. And it winds up that calcium is very much involved in activating things, whether you're talking about activating a muscle contraction or activating a nerve impulse. You know, throughout your body, whenever things are activated, it's typically involving calcium. And what's so very interesting is that your bones are basically a repository for that calcium. So there's always a dynamic. You know, everything that I'm into is about flow and dynamics. So there's always a balance occurring where the bones release calcium into the blood, and the bones absorb calcium out of the blood. And what's so interesting is that they absorb calcium out of the blood when your cells and when the body, the accumulation of the cells are fat burning, as opposed to sugar burning, which would be required to, say, activate the muscle or activate the nerve. You need the calcium out there. So there's always this balance going back and forth, regulated by the free radicals that are produced. Those are the regulatory system of everything ultimately comes down to really the electron flow, the redox, that is manifest often through free radicals, and how they modify the chemistry, biochemistry, and how that affects the overall flow. Meaning how you are collectively, all your atoms and molecules, how you are moving into the future while you're constantly replacing yourself and getting rid of yourself.
Yeah.
You're a flow
I consider myself somewhat of a free radical.
It's actually a similar kind of a thing, because you see, if you're open-minded, that means you're able to embrace newness. And free radicals tend to promote that, because as soon as we have an excess of free radicals, then the system tries to compensate and fix things again. And if there's too much of an excess, then you need a new solution. And that's what you're doing. You see, you're on a social level looking and searching for new solutions because the status quo doesn't work.
Right. So, Dr. Bob, let me ask you a question. The U.S. patent, cannabinoids as antioxidants and neuroprotectants, is based on the fact that CBD prevents reperfusion injury. And part of reperfusion injury is the massive influx of calcium into the cell after it's been denied oxygen. And then you reperfuse the cell with new oxygenated blood. And apparently it causes a massive neurotransmitter release when you resupply the blood, that's to resupply the oxygen to the cell that's been deprived for oxygen for a period. It causes a massive release of neurotransmitters, and that causes a massive influx of calcium, which actually kills the cell. And so cannabinoids, CBD in particular, apparently prevent that reperfusion injury. Do you know how it actually prevents calcium influx by that mechanism?
Yeah, you have to always go back down to the heart of it, meaning what's going on with the energy and free radicals. That's where everything always has to start. So in this case, if you're having, prior to the constriction, whatever they're using to generate the hypoxia, meaning low oxygen,
Yeah.
So you're having, normally the muscles are doing whatever they're doing, and by whatever distribution of energy sources is appropriate for their stability. So we have the electron transport system, we have glutaminolysis, and we have aerobic glycolysis. So those are the three sources that balance each other out in an attempt to optimize energy production, ideally preferring the electron transport system. But because of the free radicals, the load gets shifted to the other two, because they don't produce the free radicals. They're not inflammatory. But whenever that accumulation doesn't work properly, then you have to turn on the fat burning, which stops everything else, so that the cells can start recycling their damaged pieces. Because if you have too much damage, then nothing works properly anymore.
Dr. Bob, could you repeat that 3 times real fast? I think that went over my head, maybe. I'm not sure.
You just have to think about it, We have two things in general happening. We have energy that's being used to make things happen, like a muscle contract. And it's things that are happening that drives us as a collection of cells into the future, right? Your sights, your sounds, the food, the mosquitoes, the viruses, all of the things that enter us allow us to be. And in that process, we damage ourselves. So you have to take time out always to fix yourself. Just think about your house. Imagine if all you did was bring food in and you never flushed the toilet, you never vacuumed, you never got rid of the garbage. The environment is not going to be healthy. And the same is true in your cells. We overeat, we take in too much sugar, we accumulate too much garbage in our cells, as manifest by how the free radicals have changed the integrity of our biochemical flow. And that's what's responsible for various phenomena. So the cells are always trying to adjust to that. So when you first create a block, the first thing that happens is they run out of oxygen. Well, they have to sense that in different ways, and they have to respond to that in ways to compensate for that loss so that the flow can continue, because it's the flow that creates life on all levels, you know, on a subcellular level, cellular level, tissue level, organ level, organismic level, and not to mention, of course, the population in the biosphere. Everything's connected to everything else by the flow of mass and energy that sustains every flow-dependent structure, meaning every living system and every flow-dependent structure that the living systems make by their interactions with their environment, including our economic system, our healthcare system. All of these are flow-dependent structures that are driven ultimately, in reality. What drives every living entity is food. Food, air, and water, right? That's what everybody
And
wants.
cannabis.
And
Well,
cannabis,
that's where we're going. You see, once we created enough complexity where we have the world we're in today, well, our brains need to be able to move to a higher level of functionality, less aggression, more cooperativity, more creativity. And that's why throughout history, meaning the evolution of humanity, the evolution of vertebrates, that's when you first saw the appearance of that CB1 receptor. And as you said, it's on the cells, it's on the membranes, it's on the mitochondria. That's the critical point there, because it's regulating energy flow. And if you go through the layers of organization, energy flow, how does that manifest in terms of your behavior? It's your hunger, right? That's why people get the munchies. So we see all layers from the simplest to the more complex involving the endocannabinoid system. And those chemicals that...
I have a t-shirt that says air, water, food, cannabis. And that's the order.
Well, and that is
of
the
importance.
order. Because you see, with vertebrates, that's when the CB1 receptor first appeared. And that meant that vertebrates now, for the first time, had an extra abundance of energy that they could use to create higher forms of life. You see, it's not all accidents. It's driven. Creativity is driven by the flowing energy. And now that we can understand that, that's why cannabis is so important now, because now we can have the consciousness to understand how we were created and the fundamental role that the endocannabinoid system played in that creative process, so that we can take advantage in a healthy way of incorporating into our lives and our thinking and our society and our economic systems, kind of boundaries that make sense based on how we were created, rather than our greed and our ignorance and our ego and all the bullshit that categorizes the lower level of non-stoners, in particular, the backward-looking people, the blips, as opposed to the forward-looking people, the flips.
That's right.
Oh.
Dr. Bob, I would like you to explain the amygdala and FLPs and BLPs to our the people that watch us here.
Well, what it comes down to is that we as a system, let's go to the very essence of what life is, and then we can see how that manifests to answer your question, if I can remember to keep it together long enough. Now, of
Don't
course,
get
I
him
already forgot
started.
the question. I already forgot the question.
Amygdala.
Well, how does the amygdala and,
Right.
Amygdala.
forward-looking people and backwards-looking
Right.
people fit into this situation?
It's so very interesting. It's so very, very interesting. You know, we have to have a balance of learning and remembering, but we also have to be able to forget. You know, you want to forget wrong information and you want to retain good information. But how do you determine that up front? You see, you need some rules. And the rules, from my perspective, are the rules of how flowing energy creates things. So over the millennium that created humanity, we had that breaking point between vertebrates and invertebrates, because for the first time the CB1 receptor appeared. Back with the invertebrates, you still had cannabinoids, and the cannabinoids were there in protists, but they didn't have the receptor system. And as complexity was driven and created a level where adaptability needed a new opportunity, that's when vertebrates emerged, driven by, according to my lunacy, the CB1 receptor providing extra energy for the manifestation of God, generalized open system dynamics, the creative nature of flowing energy, you see? And that process then created excess free radicals because it was working well, meaning that the systems were able to get more and more food. They were successful. They were in a good environment, you know, whatever was going on in the world and the sun and the oceans and et cetera. There was an abundance that kept driving the creativity until it started to make too many mistakes. So the next thing that God had to do was make the CB2 receptor. Out of the CB1 receptor, it was modified, still retaining, I think, 40% or 60% of the original CB1 in the CB2, but now it has a whole different role. Now its role is to fix and balance the problems that were created by the excess flow created by creativity and hunger, meaning getting stoned, and CB1 activity as part of nature. So as that continued, the process of the dialogue of creating evolution, and I can go into the molecular terms of that at some point if people are interested, but what eventually happened was mammals have emerged. And what are mammals? Mammals are animals with mammary glands. And what's the big deal about mammary glands? It meant that the newborn infants were getting endocannabinoids. Psychoactive endocannabinoids are in mother's milk. Women and their breasts are nothing more than sophisticated cannabis delivery systems. They're like, they're like God's answer to vaporization. What do we do with this kid? He's coming out now. She's coming out after living on the placenta level of oxygen and getting food only through the diffusion of the placenta. And now it's got to breathe. And the electron transport system has to use that oxygen to make ATP. And the brain's got to start working and the lungs have to start working. And the whole system has to readjust because now it's in the world. Now it's a free living organism. It's no longer dependent on the mother in the same way. So what does she do? She gets some stone, he relaxes, gets that big smile on his face, happy, eating, you know, that nice fresh milk, creamy milk, feeling the warmth and comfort of the mother. And now you've created, a good lineage for the development of the entity. Man's special. We take care of our kids for decades. Now more so than ever, decades. But for much more so than a fish that pops out a bunch of eggs.
So let me interrupt. How does this relate to FLP, BLP?
Right. So cannabis drives the evolution of our mind and it powers our brain. But everything is always a balance of opposing forces. So half of the population will naturally be deficient in certain cannabinoid activities. It's unavoidable. And the other half will be above average. So what are the consequences of things like that? So let's look. Again, you have to be able to forget things as well as remember things. You don't want to fill up your head with wrong information. So let's look at, there's a beautiful experiment that was done. I'm blanking on the guy's name. Quite a while ago when they first made the knockout mice, where you can eliminate a gene. So you can make mice that have no CB1 activity. So they cannot get stoned. And what are the characteristics of these mice? Well, number one, they die prematurely. So you got to be able to get stoned if you want to live a healthy life, right? Your natural level of stonedness, at least.
And they get colon cancer.
They get a variety of, well, there's the double knockouts too. They get all sorts of shit. Because you know, cannabis is necessary. Your endocannabinoid system is integral. They did experiments where they gave them tons of cannabis oil in an effort to show that it would promote cancer. But the problem was the mice lived longer and had fewer cancers. So they didn't publish that one until it was eventually leaked, I think in 1968 or 69 or something like that, 90, I don't remember the year. In any event, the point is they've been suppressing the benefits of cannabis for a long time, but this one experiment kind of shows it all. If you take a normal mouse versus a knockout mouse, and you put them in what's called a Morris water maze. It's a big pan of water, and they have to swim. And in that pan of water, you have a little island that they can come to and then get out of the water so they don't have to swim. So you take the normal mice and you put them in the water, you take the knockout mice and you put them in the water, and they freak out, they swim around until they find the platform. And once they have found the platform, if you take them out and you put them back in, they'll go right to the platform. Both the normal mice and the knockout mice that can't get high. So once you've trained them like that, now move the platform to a new position.
Right.
And the normal mice, you put them in and they go to where it used to be. It's not there. They find it again. And now if you take them out, they'll go to the new position. With the CB1 knockout mice, the mice who cannot get high, you move it, they go to the new place, they find the new place, you take them out, they go back in, you take them out, they go back in, you take them out, they go back in.